All right, it looks like everything is online finally. All right, we had a little bit of a hiccup with YouTube, but we should be streaming now. So welcome everybody to Pro-Life, Pro-Liberty Live. It is 4 o'clock on Monday, and we are getting started. So another viewer last week sent me a video, and I linked it in the description. So if you haven't watched it yet, feel free to go and watch it when you get a chance. And basically, this person in the video, not the person who sent it to me, the person who sent it to me saw the video and wanted to share with me what this person said and ask me kind of for my take on it. And so the person in the video, he seems to be responding to some pro-life arguments that he has heard, okay? The ones he has heard are not great. So that's not on him, that's on the pro-life people who've been talking to him. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to really know our stuff and know our arguments before we talk to people, because there are, on both sides, on both the pro-life and pro-choice sides, there are people who, on both sides who don't really know their stuff, and they kind of say things that make their side look bad. And so you see this on both sides. You see pro-choice people who just repeat slogans and they don't really make arguments. And you see pro-life people who just repeat slogans and don't really make arguments. And so it's really easy to go after those. So I wanted to talk about this guy's responses to those arguments one at a time. He brings up 2 points, and I wanted to respond to both of those one at a time. So if you've watched the video, you know that he says that he used to do a lot of thought experiments, but he's not really doing those right now. And so he instead is going to bring up some real life stories, some real life instances that he thinks prove that pro-lifers are wrong about when life begins, or the value or the right to life, or various pro-life arguments that he's heard. And so he starts with this case of fetus in fetu in China. And so if you don't know what that is where, let's explain this the best. Actually, the best way I can explain this is to bring up, I have this nice little article from, it's from the Embryo Product Encyclopedia. And they have a little thing on fetus and fetu, and it explains it in some more scientific terms. So if you don't know what this is, if this is a new concept to you, I do recommend, I put the link in the description, I do recommend taking a look at it. But the basic idea is that this is where twins develop. So you have an embryo, you have sperm and egg, fertilized egg, embryo, and the embryo, the zygote splits into 2. And so that's how normally you would get identical twins this way. And so we would, as pro-lifers, would recognize, when that embryo splits into 2 and we have 2 separate organisms that are developing, we would recognize that as 2 separate individuals, right? And that's where, that's one answer to the idea, oh, it's just a clump of cells. Well, no, we have 2 distinct individuals that are developing along separate developmental paths. And that is a really important point for where we're going next. So the story that the YouTube, on the YouTube video that I'm responding to, and the reason I'm not showing you the video is because I want to let him speak for himself. I don't want to show you clips of what he says, and I don't just want to play the whole thing for you. The link is there. You can go watch it. Give him his views. YouTube is based on views. I'm not going to take his views by showing you his video in my video. So do go watch his video. Do listen to what he has to say. Let's have an open mind. Let's have a discussion. But what he brings up this case from China where you have a fetus and fetu situation where you have the twins, and one twin is absorbed into the other. And that terminology, is can be, you're like, how are they absorbed? And it basically is where there's a developmental issue with one of the twins. They are not developing along their developmental path. Their developmental path ends, and they essentially fuse, their cells fuse with those of the other twin. And so some of the genetic material is still there, but they are no longer an independent organism developing along their own developmental path. Their developmental path has ended. And so while the cells are still alive at this point when this happens, and we're not just talking about conjoined twins here. Conjoined twins, you have both developmental paths still occurring. You have both organisms still developing. They've got some cells that are in common. They're attached to each other. In this case, the one twin stops developing and ends up being more parasitic. So a lot of people will call a fetus a parasite, which is not really the case. In this case, we do see a parasitic relationship where where one organism is no longer developing on their own. They're no longer following their normal developmental path. And they are now taking nutrients, they're taking blood, they're taking resources from the other, and not really developing themselves. So, and I'm not an embryologist, and so I may be totally ruining this explanation, which is why I linked this article right here. I'm pointing in the right direction, right there, so that you can see this for yourself and you can understand it for yourself. But what's important to understand is in the case from China that this person is referencing, the second twin, the twin that became the fetus in V2 twin, is no longer a living, developing, growing human being, right? What ends up happening is the twin that is born essentially has an extra set of male genitalia on his back, and the pro-choice person, he says, well, therefore, when you remove that extra set of genitalia, you are killing the twin that did not fully develop. And so that I would not say that. I would not argue that. And it's a little bit of a straw man because he kind of assumes what the pro-life position would be. And he says the pro-life position has to be this. And I'd say no, as a pro-life person, I would say no, it does not have to be this. So it's really important to understand that. It's really important to say, okay, this is no longer two individuals that are developing. At some point during gestation, at some point, one individual stopped developing and was absorbed into the body of the other and is no longer a living, developing human in the sense of a whole organism. And this is where we can go to the whole versus part argument. Because a lot of people will say, well, my finger has cells. My finger is alive. If I cut off my finger will die. Is my finger a separate organism, a living human being? Well, no. Now, we can understand the concept of part versus whole, right? We can understand that if I cut off my finger, those cells will stay alive for a period of time, but that does not make my finger a separate human being. And this comes back to the developmental path that an embryo follows beginning from fertilization, which is where we all begin, right? We all begin at fertilization and we all follow our own unique developmental path, beginning there and ending in our death, whenever that may be and from whatever cause that may be. But our developmental path is continuous throughout that process. And so, so I would say in this particular case in China that the twin was already gone, was no longer developing, was no longer an independent, separate organism. So, so no, I would not make the case that removing that genitalia was murder. So that article is there, but I also want to share with you guys some stuff about from actual embryologists about, let's see where it is. There it is. This is a post that I did on my blog some time ago, and somebody had asked for some scientific resources. And so I shared this, and these are some quotes from embryology textbooks from respected embryologists talking about when life begins. And they talk about, sperm and egg fusing together, creating a new living organism. And they talk about a new human being. They talk about, a new development, a new organism, a separate organism. And I think it was down here, they talk about two gametes coming together to fuse into one zygote, right? And there was one, oh, there we go. I like this one. Although life is a continuous process, fertilization is a critical landmark because under ordinary circumstances, a new genetically distinct human organism is thereby formed. So again, genetically distinct human organism. And when we say genetically distinct, we don't just mean a unique set of DNA because, obviously identical twins have identical DNA. But when we're talking about when we say genetically distinct, we mean that unique DNA, and we mean that it is following that living organism is following their genetic code along a developmental path. Because our genetic code it's not just something that can be used to identify us. DNA isn't just like a fingerprint where, I can match DNA from this person to this person. It's an instruction manual. It's a genetic code that is used for our development, and we follow that code. So to say that that just because you have some DNA that's distinct, that means you have a separate organism, that's not scientifically correct. And I don't know any pro-lifer who would say that, who knows their stuff. Again, not everybody knows their stuff, and it's important that we do. The other thing I want to say about that particular argument, about the situation in China with that particular child and what remained of his brother. So this was a male child. He had a brother that did not survive. And the remaining tissue from his brother, who was no longer alive at that point, was on his back. So what I want to say about that is this is a very rare case. And even that article about fetus in fetu that I linked, it says that there's about 100 of these cases, like worldwide, known, at least at the time of that article was published. So to make policy, to make law based on 100 cases, based on the rare exception, and to say that because there is this weird case and this rare exception, therefore we should not protect any human beings under normal circumstances. And that's not to say that we shouldn't protect human beings in extreme circumstances, but that's to say that to make policy based off of the extreme, based off of the exception, is not good policy. And so while I understand that this is a weird situation, and scientists are still trying to understand how fetus in fetu happens, at what point in development it happens, what are the circumstances that cause it, they're still trying to understand that. And and I don't think we can make abortion law or abortion policy one way or the other based on such an extreme circumstance. So that is going to bring me to the next one, which is the motherhood objection to bodily rights arguments. And so this is a case of pro-lifers using an argument that I myself would not like to use. And I can understand why they use it. And so the concept here is about bodily rights arguments and the right to refuse. And so you'll hear this from people who say, well, you can't force someone to be an organ donor. They have the right to refuse. They have the right to refuse to have somebody use their body. And you'll hear this with the violinist. And if you're not familiar with the violinist argument, basically the way it goes is that you get knocked over the head and you wake up in the hospital and you are now attached via tubes to somebody laying in the bed next to you, or in another bed. And the doctor tells you, oh, I'm so sorry. This guy over here, he's a world-renowned violinist, and the Society of Music Lovers, wanted to save his life. He's dying of, kidney failure, or, he's dying of some rare disease. And the only way to save him was to have him receive transfusions from somebody who matched, and you are the only one who matches, so only you can save him. So they kidnapped you and they put you on this bed and they hooked you up. And if you unhook, he will die. And so their argument, so the violinist argument, is the idea that I have the right to unhook from this stranger who is laying in this bed and walk away, even though that means he will die. And I could choose to not unhook, and I could choose to support this person, but I don't have to. That's the violinist argument in a nutshell. What some people will say to that is that because there's a different relationship between the fetus and the mother and between you and a stranger, therefore, because of the motherhood obligation, because of the obligation of a parent to a child, therefore she cannot disconnect. I don't like that because I think there's a lot better ways to go about answering the violinist. And also because of what the YouTube video that I'm responding to said, which was, well, what about surrogate mothers who have no genetic connection to their child? And if they say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, do they have the right to abort? Because they no longer have that obligation between parent and child. And I say that's a reason why we probably shouldn't do surrogacy, but also I would say that there's still a value to that life, that the surrogate mother is still not justified in killing the child because she's not related to them. And he brings up a case where it was a fertility clinic. They were supposed to be doing IVF. They were supposed to be implanting these embryos, and they implanted the wrong embryos into this woman, that's just, oh my goodness, like that, I had this child that was supposed to be implanted and now it's the wrong child, and what happened to my child? And, and so you can almost imagine, the parents freaking out at that. But, he says that, well, therefore, they had no relationship to this child. The child was not supposed to be there. They didn't ask for that child to be there. It's the wrong child. Therefore, do they have the right to abort? And so that's the reason why I don't like the motherhood claim, is because you can make that argument and you could say, well, as long as they're not genetically related, which again, we're talking about making policy based off of rare cases, but it's not the best argument. To understand, the bodily rights argument, and to understand the violinist, we need to see that, okay, we need to look at this violinist argument with a critical eye and say, okay, you wake up next to a stranger and you are connected to them. You are bedridden, and if you get up and walk away, okay, they will die. This is a person who is dying of a disease. And while we should generally try to do whatever interventions we can, this is not somebody following their normal path of development. This isn't just part of being a human being, is sometimes you have to be, connected to a stranger in the hospital. So, and the violinist situation where you're connected to this violinist, this is an example of extraordinary care. And extraordinary care is any time where somebody would die otherwise, and you have to go above and beyond just the normal basic physical needs that we have in order to save them. So our basic physical needs, we need food, we need water, we need oxygen, we need a temperature regulated environment, that sort of thing. And in that, in ordinary care, you're making sure that those basic needs are met that we all have, that we all need to survive. And so parents are expected to provide ordinary care. We're also expected to, doctors are expected to provide ordinary care. And that's one of the problems we have when we talk about disconnecting food and water from people who are in hospice and saying, well, you're not providing ordinary care. You may stop providing extraordinary care, that above and beyond level of care in a hospice or palliative care situation. But you don't want to stop ordinary care, because we all need ordinary care. We all need those ordinary basic things. And the same is true of the embryo or the fetus. They need ordinary care. They need food, they need water, and they need oxygen, and they receive those from the mother. So the mother's providing ordinary care, or even if it's not the mother, the woman in whose womb the child is is providing ordinary care. And so you can talk about ordinary care. You can also talk about the difference between a child who is dependent and an adult who is not, right? Or not so much dependent, but you talk about a child versus an adult, and you talk about somebody who is, forcing themselves on you. And so in the case of the violinist didn't choose this either. But you can have a conversation with the violinist. You can have an agreement. You can discuss. You can talk to them, theoretically, right? I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit here, but I wouldn't use the motherhood argument for bodily rights. I would use either, there's the cabin in the blizzard argument from the Equal Rights Institute, and I think I linked that below. I will double check. If I didn't, I'll add it. And also the argument that I like to use when responding to bodily rights, we're saying I have the right to refuse, I have the right to unhook. I like to use this one, and it goes a little bit something like this. You live in a place where blizzards happen. You live in a house and you're up north and blizzards happen and you're prepared for them. You're prepared for a blizzard. You know that you might be stuck in your house for weeks at a time. And you have some food stocked up. You have supplies stocked up for several weeks. And and a blizzard starts, you lose all communication, you lose your power, but you've got firewood, you've got food, you've got supplies, you're going to be okay. You're just going to settle in, you're going to read a good book and ride this out. Then you hear a window shatter and you rush into the other room and you've got your shotgun for home defense because you don't know who just broke into your house, but you are ready to defend yourself and you have a right to defend yourself. Only instead of a thief or somebody coming to steal from you, somebody coming to harm you, you see a child, let's say a 5-year-old child, and they're holding a rock that they used to smash the window. And they've climbed through the window, they're cut, they're a little bit bloodied, and they're standing there completely helpless. And outside you have the raging winds and snow and far below freezing, below zero temperatures. And the snow's piled high. There's no way that you are going anywhere. There's no communication. You can't get help for this child. You are the only person who can be there for that child. You are the only person who can care for that child, at least until the blizzard ends. Once the blizzard ends, then potentially you could figure out another situation, or you could choose, to adopt that child if they don't have a family of their own to go back to. You can make those arrangements. But until the blizzard ends, that child is completely dependent on you, even though you have no relationship to this child. Normally, under normal circumstances, you would have no responsibility to this child. But this child is here. And your options are to care for them, provide ordinary care, food, water, shelter, okay, protection from the elements, right? Or you could kill them. I don't think we would justify that. I don't think we would tell anybody that that's justified. You could let them stay in your house, but just refuse to feed them. And they might starve in the few weeks that it would take. They would get sick and possibly die. Or you could put them out in the snow. You could say, nope, I'm going to put you right back outside. I'm going to seal up that window, board it up. Bye. But you know that by even though putting them outside is not the same, you might say, okay, well, that's not the same as killing them. But it is, because you put them outside in the blizzard and they have no means of protecting themselves, no means of caring for themselves. And so I think we understand that difference between somebody breaking into your house, between somebody kidnapping you, between any of these kinds of extreme scenarios, and a child who is dependent on you, for survival. And regardless of whether you're related to them, regardless of whether you didn't ask for this situation, you didn't volunteer for this, but that child is now dependent on you. And so you are now a de facto guardian. And so the Equal Rights Institute uses this term, de facto guardian, and they use a similar argument. Theirs is this thing. But the de facto guardian argument says, okay, you've got this vulnerable, dependent child who needs ordinary care and cannot fend for themselves. And you were the only one to care for them. You are now the de facto guardian. It is now your responsibility to care for them. And so when you're in that de facto guardian situation, you have those responsibilities, and to do otherwise, to do anything else other than provide that ordinary care, we would not say that's justified. I also want to talk about the concept of, in this thought experiment that I am using a thought experiment, and I know the creator of the YouTube video, he said he didn't want to use thought experiments anymore, or at least that people were criticizing. Maybe he does like thought experiments and people were criticizing for it. I don't know. But one of the issues with it is the fact that there is not a physical connection like there is in pregnancy. And you can argue this, yes. But I think the concept here is it's not so much about whether or not there's a physical connection. It's about whether or not I have to provide ordinary care for this person, and whether or not pregnancy is providing ordinary care for that child. That you have a dependent, helpless child who needs ordinary care to survive. And whether or not you have a duty as the de facto guardian to provide that ordinary care. And I would say yes. I would say yes that you do. And we can have that discussion. But I would say this differently than perhaps the motherhood argument. It's not because you're the child's mother, but it's because you're the de facto guardian. So there's that. And another issue too with the right to refuse argument and with the violinist is the distinction between unhooking yourself from another person who will die without you, without being hooked up to you, they will die, versus what happens in an abortion. And I will link the abortionprocedures.com is the website for this. I will link it in the description later, but abortionprocedures.com, it's pretty easy one to type in. And you can see what abortion actually does to a preborn child. Now, the closest comparison to unhooking is a medication abortion, but even then, if you watch what happens, if you hear Dr. Anthony Levatino describe what happens in that medication abortion, there is a big distinction between unhooking yourself from some tubes and the way that abortion kills this child in a medication abortion. The other types of abortion are much more violent than just simply unhooking yourself, and I wouldn't say you could compare them at all. So I would also offer that criticism to the violinist. So I hope this was helpful in my response to these arguments. They were kind of strange arguments. I don't mean that as an insult or anything, but they were kind of, I certainly hadn't heard those specific arguments before. But again, I want to go back to, in both cases, we were talking about extreme rare scenarios that are being used to create general policy. And if our general policy is, well, we can't protect all of these human beings because we have this little tiny percentage where something weird is going on, something different, something unusual, something we don't know what to do with. I don't think that's a great way to approach ethics and morality. I think we should have our general policy for the general cases, and then we can talk about case-by-case situations where things are different. And so in both of these arguments that this person uses, in both of these arguments, we have extreme cases that are being used to attack the general policy that applies to the general situation that most people are in, that most preborn babies are in. So again, I hope this was helpful. I'm not seeing any arguments that I don't know if anybody else wants me to answer any other pro-choice arguments. If you do, go ahead and throw those in the chat real quick. If not, then I think this will be it for me for this week. And then in the description, there is a link to the feedback form, which is where you can tell me what you think. You can give me your arguments that you want me to respond to if you didn't have one ready for right now. And you can kind of, you can kind of throw some ideas at me, or you can tell me what you would like me to talk about in my next show. Otherwise, I'll pick a topic if nobody sends me anything. And then Real quick, also in the description is the links to find me on other forms of social media, so Twitter and Tumblr, primarily, because if you're on YouTube, you already know my YouTube. And then, if you have the inclination, you can go to ko-fi.com/pro-life-pro-liberty and buy me a coffee and support this channel. So I really appreciate that. Please do hit like and do subscribe so that it does tell the algorithms to show my videos to more people, and that it does let me know that you are watching. So even if you're watching later because you couldn't make it for the live stream, I really would appreciate your feedback and your kind of responses there. So thank you guys so much.